Okay, so we were initially going to talk about this, and indeed we did talk about this a few weeks ago, but we decided to remove the discussion in the end. It's all about Capcom's addition of Enigma DRM to existing games in its lineup, right? So they're basically, seemingly, whenever a game gets a title update, um, they go back and they add in retrospectively new DRM. And in the case of this week's release, it was Monster Hunter Rise, which seemingly had Denuvo removed and Enigma added, which sounds a bit like a sort of business decision, really. Possibly one is cheaper than the other. The upshot of that was that, similar to other sort of things we've seen in these scenarios, Steam Deck stopped working. Then it was updated with a fix that, basically made everything well again. I don't really have too many issues with the concept of. This is tricky. Actually, I do have issues because the concept of like this really old game, I guess Monster Hunter Rise isn't really that old, but certainly there are other titles in the lineup where this has happened. The one that kicked it off was Resident Evil Revelations, I believe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where basically a game that has, it's crested. It's now just a sort of library title. It's not going to be making huge amounts of money anymore. The concept that the publisher is going back and retroactively adding DRM just sort of seems at odds with what should really happen, ideally. I mean, obviously, these guys have got entirely the right to protect their intellectual property. But it isn't sort of sitting well with these older library titles where we kind of need DRM removed, if anything. Mm-hmm. This is a tricky one, Alex. So where do you sit on this?
I've got two perspectives. One is that, like you, I don't feel like there's any real need to do this. And this is just kind of like, even if it doesn't have any large scale effect on the users, like, I don't know, like the Steam Deck not working thing, as long as it works after like one day, I guess that's reasonable. So if it's not affecting things, but I think we should just never have DRM added to games over time that released with different DRM or no DRM at all. And one thing that I think that this is going to be more, actually, I think there should be a Valve issue here where Valve should allow users to arbitrarily choose which build of a game they download ever since they bought it, as long as it's not like a multiplayer live service title or something like that, because they have on their Steam Depot, they've got every single build that's been uploaded ever since the game was put on Steam. But they should allow the user, just like GOG does, to elect out of a certain build of the game. And I think that should be kind of like as part of the end user license agreement when you buy a game on Steam, so that people can actually avoid the DRM copy of a game that's been added. Or in the case of older titles, sometimes older versions of the game work on certain hardware that newer game versions don't, because they've been updated. And I think this is something actually that Valve needs to look into as some sort of new way to allow for version control on Steam from the user perspective, because it's currently not there other than elective beta branches that developers make available for people. But I actually think it should be fully in the hands of the user, especially in a case like this where when you bought that title, there's no way you thought like, yeah, I'm buying it because it has DRM. That's something the developer added after the fact, and you may not agree with that as a user. And I think to protect the user a little bit, it would be great to make it elective.
But wouldn't the user simply be choosing between Denuvo and Enigma in this case?
In this case, yes. But it would also give us awesome tools to say, okay, is one affecting the performance more than the other? Is one affecting the performance at all? If you have a baseline, you can actually say what the difference is without having to go through a legal means to figure out what a baseline is.
Yeah.
So I think this is all fine and dandy actually for any use case, even if it's not the one where they add DRM after the fact.
Yeah, the first time we discussed this and we actually didn't end up running it, it was basically hot on the heels of the Revelations debacle, where there was all manner of accusations flying about, like, how Capcom's got like a war on modding, the game can't be moddable anymore, this sort of thing. And it actually turns out with this, certainly with Monster Hunter, but I believe the other ones as well, that it's similar to other DRMs, something that modders have to deal with, but it doesn't actually seem that onerous in the sort of eventuality. And it certainly seemed the case it's not a huge impact on whatever's happening mod-wise with Monster Hunter Rise. It's just the concept, really, that there's no sort of program to remove DRM, as opposed to, I guess it's still at the same time Capcom's well within its rights to protect its property. That's the weird thing I've got going on here. There's the stuff that should seem right and the stuff that, is right from a commercial perspective. John, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I mean, I just think after a certain amount of time has passed, I feel like, especially if like Denuvo has these fees and such associated with long-term protection, that they should maybe just remove the DRM at a certain point, like just get rid of it. I know no company's going to want to make that choice, but come on now.
Well, some companies do. They do remove.
That's a good point.
Doom Eternal, right?
Yeah.
And they removed it.
Did they?
I believe that's
if so,
what
that's
I
great.
recall. Maybe I'm wrong.
But either way, that's kind of the path I would like to see more about, which that would contribute to preservation of these games, is having DRM-free versions out there, right? Once the most of the sales have passed, and I don't think it would actually necessarily result in a giant rise in piracy either. I mean, these games will continue to exist on platforms such as Steam. When sales come up, people are going to buy them anyway. They'd probably rather have official versions in Steam to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess fundamentally, why are the publishers using this DRM? And primarily, it's when a hot new game comes out, it's to protect the massive income of revenue that's going to cover the game's development cost, right?
Which makes sense.
But further on, yeah, absolutely. But further on, when you're in the long tail, so to speak, the games are typically a lot cheaper. And, I don't really see the sort of commercial imperative at that point to keep the DRM in, if it is having a detrimental effect to the game. That's the other thing. Denuvo, Enigma, it's really difficult to actually ascertain what impact it is having on the game,
right,
at any given point. It's certainly an additive thing that, can't be making the game run any faster.
No. I guess the one thing about adding old DRM that's also a bit of a bad thing, even if it affects no one who currently buys the game, who just is playing the game on a casual perspective, is that legacy mods that are the mod author just doesn't want to touch the mod anymore. If every single time you update like a decade-old game, you break legacy modding. To a certain degree. And if it's just arbitrarily updated to add in DRM on top of that, you're breaking legacy mods that will maybe never be touched again by the mod authors. So they'll never be accessible again, because the only way to access the game is via Steam, for example, or some downloadable service where you don't actually have the old version available anymore, unless it's probably been pirated or copied at some point. So I would just like... There's just don't out of the blue update old games with DRM is all I want to say.
Yep.
I think this might add complications for stuff like Steam Deck in the future, where, the DRM could be causing issues with a future device that just hasn't been created yet.
Right.
Yep.
Star Force, John, right?
Oh, God, yeah. Freaking Star Force. Like, I think it may have been cracked at some point, but for like a decade. There was a specific version of Trackmania that I owned, Trackmania Sunrise, which I liked that specific version of Trackmania, but the Star Force included in that only worked on Windows XP. And it was a nasty piece of DRM. Like, Star Force was the worst. And that version, at least up until maybe recently, I can't remember, it was never cracked, which meant you just could not play the game on a modern PC at all, which I found unacceptable, because I actually, that was I own a lot of physical PC games still, a lot of classic ones, and that was like the only one in my entire collection that just was not playable despite having the disc. It was not possible to play that game, and that sucks. So that kind of stuff, it's no good. that DRM stuff, man. I'm not a fan.
Fair enough. I don't think there's too much more we can add to this, but it is what it is, right? It's a bit unfortunate, but